sale.
Right. And it was interesting because Christia and I did not touch the entire time we were there, because it's really important that we each are able to maintain our queer identity, which is kind of difficult when we present as a heterosexual couple. So when we're in gay spaces, we don't touch each other so that she can be read as a lesbian and I can be read as a gay man, and we can just hold on to our queer identity just a little bit. So you were talking to your mom about that.
Mm-hmm. I don't really remember.
Can you tell me more about that? I talked to my mom about it, and I don't want to share with you.
No, she was...
Hey, Tracy.
I'm trying to remember the really important parts of that conversation.
Well, it can be a struggle for us to maintain our queer identity, but also, she's got it, so she's going to take over here.
For others to...
You guys all just a little hedgehog hanging from your mouth there. Alright.
It's hard for others to perceive us as queer. Even, I mean, obviously, in the community and in public, when we're together, we're read as a heterosexual couple. And even my mom was like, yeah, I still kind of don't get it, you know, and she's amazing. But just that we both identify as queer, but we're in this long-term committed relationship with each other. Yeah.
But I think you were talking about the challenges for us to be in spaces and be read as queer, but then also how because we're seen as a heterosexual couple, that we're kind of not welcomed in a lot of queer spaces, and the difficulty of that kind of our own identity, but then the presentation of a different identity, and how even when we are in queer spaces, sometimes we're not, I don't know that we're not welcomed, but we're certainly not embraced in the same way as if we would be if Christia was bringing her girlfriend and I was bringing my boyfriend.
Right.
And I think Christia gets read as my fag hag a lot, which is funny and fine for me.
Well, and we always joke about, like, why is that gay guy kissing that lesbian?
Right.
Like, that people, when they first see us, if we're not showing affection to each other or whatever, that they might read us as queer individually, but then being affectionate in public.
Right. And even like how we fall into some heteronormative sorts of behaviors within our life, and we joke about that, but I think it was a couple weeks ago you said something about it, and it was like, but those are the things that are natural for us, and that there's nothing wrong with being heteronormative if it's authentic. It's an authentic experience. Because for all the things that we're heteronormative about, there's all these things that we're not also. So I think it's interesting that I have a t-shirt that says queer on the front, and on the back it says any questions, and I was taking the dogs out the other day, and our neighbor was outside with a friend of hers and saw my shirt and said, you know, queer, that's funny, and laughed at it. But then the next interaction I had with her, I feel like she came out to me, and it was interesting because if we had been read or understood as a queer couple to begin with, I wonder if she would have had the hesitation, or if it was simply because, like, well, there's this heterosexual couple, there's a heterosexual guy, I'm not, you know, going to come out to him as a single lesbian living by myself. And it was a weird experience for me. I don't know, I'm still getting used to that stuff.
And I think it's interesting because it'll be really interesting to see how we create community in Portland, and who our community ends up being. Just because, you know, the queer community, it's like finding people and finding each other, and it's just different. In our, like, well, where we work, and, you know,
when we get those jobs.
Right.
Well, I think the other thing for me is that in order for me to have, I don't know, I think part of affirming my queer identity, or having it be affirmed by other people, maybe not always, but there's a part of me that wonders if I'm going to have to come out as trans in order to do that. Because what makes me queer is partially my attraction to men, but beyond that is my trans identity, and the fact that I lived for 16 years in the lesbian community, and so it's all of that stuff. So I feel like my might have to come out to do that, which is fine. I don't have an issue with that, but it's a whole different way of trying to affirm a queer identity that is different than when we lived in Chico. You know, because everyone knew that I was trans, and everyone knew, a lot of people knew me prior to my transition, and so I was seen as queer without a lot of, well, I had to do a lot of work to transition, but without a lot of explanation, I suppose. And people knew you with, you know, a previous partner being female, and so it's just different. I'm trying to figure out how to have that space.
Well, and you have, like, I mean, if you want to, you can come out as trans. You know, I am not gonna out you to anyone. You know, like, that's yours, and so I get to say, I identify as queer, and you know, like, just go on this whole. I'm attracted to people all across the gender spectrum, and I'm currently dating a male, like,
right.
If I really want people to know that I am queer.
Which do you?
Well, I think it goes back to that community thing, like, totally. Like, for the gay community in Portland, absolutely. Like, I think that's valuable to us. Or will be, hopefully.
You know, Christia had mentioned it's Pride this weekend, and we both were saying earlier that we're not really excited for it, which is an odd experience for me because Pride is like Christmas. Like, I love it, but it's always through San Francisco Pride, and my experience of it has always been with going with a group of people and not knowing anyone. And I just have this vision of us walking around, and it's like, we are going to be the hetero couple that, you know, sometimes I would make, not fun of necessarily, but I would notice at San Francisco of, like, the hetero couple looking at all the gays. And tomorrow and Sunday, because nobody knows this and we have no relationship with people here, we are going to come off as looking like, potentially, two things. The hetero couple, or the hetero couple that just kind of happened upon Pride, or the hetero couple that people talk about, like, I wonder if he knows that his girlfriend's a lesbian, and I wonder if she knows that her boyfriend's a fag. Which is fine and funny, but there's still, both of those are kind of places that we have to navigate around and figure out how to continue to have our relationship and what makes sense for us, but also our identity that is conflictual with the picture that people see of us.
And I think it's, and I've said this before, and it's not great, but, you know, you see the married couple or whoever, the heterosexual couple, and you're like, ooh, he kind of looks like he might be gay, you know, like, maybe he hasn't come out yet, and I think about that with us, like, which is totally about other people and how they perceive us, and that doesn't really matter, but when you're in a totally new space, trying to kind of present your identity and make friends and make community, it is a little bit, I don't know.
More difficult?
Yeah, and I think about that. I'm like, well, what are they thinking about that? Like our neighbor.
Right. Well, and it was interesting because after I wore the queer shirt, then what came up for me, which I didn't talk at all about actually, is all of a sudden I started to wonder if my masculinity was being questioned. Like, you know, was there some part of her that was like, whoa, I thought that was a guy, maybe that's just a really butch lesbian. And I was like, oh, I kind of have to, like, do some work with myself around that because probably that's not accurate, but it's hard for me not to go back to that place because I've had such a distorted sense of self for so long that's a really well-developed and secure place within me. And the other experience of just being okay with me and solid in my identity and my presentation to the world and being read as I have always read myself, that's still new. And so when push comes to shove and something happens, my default place is the place that I've spent a lot of time in, not necessarily the new, more confident or comfortable place. So that was an interesting sort of thing to try to, like, because I don't really know how to do hypermasculine. I don't really own that space, nor do I want to own that space, but I find myself being incredibly awkward when interacting with people around here because I know that I'm just being read as a straight white guy, which just drives me crazy on so many levels. And I always feel like I need to say there's nothing wrong with a straight white guy because I'm just thinking of Wes right now. But I think that overwhelmingly people like Wes and some of our friends that are straight white guys are the exceptions, not necessarily the standards of what straight white guy represents.